It was a cold, uneasy kind of quiet that settled over Enterprise, Alabama this past Christmas evening. Not the peaceful kind folks are used to, neither. No, this was the kind of quiet that sits wrong in your chest. The kind that makes you pause mid-step without even knowing why. Like the whole town was holding its breath and didn't even realize it yet. Christmas usually wraps that place up warm, porch lights glowing soft, folks drifting home from family visits, kids passed out on couches with new toys that are still clutched in their hands. But that night, something shifted. And it didn't come with sirens at first, and it didn't come with shouting. It came soft, and then it all came at once. A baby was reported missing. Gone. No noise to mark it, no clear sign pointing the way. Just a moment where everything was normal, and the next where it wasn't. Now, when you're talking about something like this, everything comes back to one thing. The last time that child was known to be safe. Christmas night, inside the home. The baby had been fed, settled down, and put to rest. Quiet, calm, and routine. The kind of moment nobody thinks twice about. And at some point later in the evening, the child's mother stepped away briefly. And when she came back, something wasn't right. The baby was no longer where they had been placed. That's the moment everything changes, because there ain't no easing into a situation like that. 1 second, it's confusion, and the next second, it's nothing but panic. The call to report the child missing set everything in motion. And in a town like Enterprise, it don't take long before folks realize something serious is going down. Law enforcement, they responded quickly. That kind of call don't sit in a quay, it moves. Because when a child's involved, especially one that young, every minute matters more than folks like to admit. When officers arrived, they stepped into a situation already heavy with emotion. A home that didn't immediately explain what had happened. A parent in distress and a question that needed answering fast. Where is the baby? Now here's the part folks don't always see from the outside. You see, in those first moments, officers don't assume anything. They do not jump to conclusions. They start really simple. Check the house, check the rooms, check anywhere a child could possibly be. Because sometimes, rare, but it happens, there's a great explanation close by. But when those first checks come up empty, that's when things turn. Once it's clear the child ain't inside or around that home, everything shifts. More units get called in, and the area starts to expand. And what started as a single call turns into a full-scale response. That's when reality starts setting in. Because a missing child case don't stay small for very long. Word travels fast in Coffee County. Faster than folks realize. Lights start flicking on in nearby homes. Front doors begin to open. Neighbors step out, looking toward the same place, trying to piece together what the hell's going on without anybody saying it outright. And you can feel it spread. That shift. from normal to something else entirely. Because when something like this happens close to home, it does not feel distant. It feels very, very personal. And as the hours pass, answers do not come easy. Searches begin. Questions start stacking up. And the hardest part settles in really slow. There ain't an obvious explanation. No clear direction. Just pieces. But not enough of them. And for everybody involved, from law enforcement to the family to the folks standing outside watching it unfold, that's when the night starts feeling long. Really long. Because once a moment like that happens, there's no going back to normal. Not that night, not the next day, not for a very long time. All that's left is one question hanging in the air over Enterprise, Alabama. What happened in that small window of time when everything changed? I need y'all to understand. You see, that night in Enterprise didn't explode into chaos all at once. It kind of crept in there, slow but heavy. And by the time law enforcement got on scene, Christmas had already gone quiet across most of Enterprise. Folks were inside, doors were shut, the heat was running, thinking the day was over. But inside that house, that's where everything had already turned upside down. The first officers through that door weren't walking into a clear situation at all. There was no obvious sign of what had happened. Things like broken glass. Maybe a door got kicked in. And no immediate evidence screaming for attention. But what they did have was urgency. And a parent telling them the baby was gone. Now, in cases like this, especially involving a child that young, officers do not waste time trying to figure out the why just yet. They focus on the where. Because if there's even a chance that child is nearby, every second does matter. They always start simple. Methodical. Every room gets checked with a fine-tooth comb. Closets, corners, behind the furniture, anywhere a child could possibly be. Even places that don't make sense. Because sometimes panic can distort what people think they saw or even did. So law enforcement checks it all anyway. But this time, that first suite came up totally empty. And when that happens, you can feel the shift in the room. There's a moment in cases like this, it don't last long, but it's there. A moment where everybody involved realizes this ain't gonna have a quick answer. And that moment hit fast. Because if the child isn't inside and isn't immediately outside, then the situation just got a whole lot bigger. More units get called in. The area around the home starts getting a lot of attention. Yards, nearby spaces, anywhere someone could have passed through without being noticed. And here's where things start getting complicated. Because the more space you have to cover, the harder it becomes to control what you're looking at. Especially in parts of Coffee County where land don't sit flat and open. Out there, you've got patches of woods, uneven ground, peanut fields, cotton fields, and places where visibility drops off quick, not to mention the kudzu. Yes, kudzu still grows around Christmas time. You don't have to go far before things start getting hard to search thoroughly. While search efforts are starting up, another part of the job begins at the same time. And it's just as important. Figuring out the timeline. Officers start asking the questions they always ask. When was the child last seen? Who was in the home? What happened leading up to the moments thing went wrong? Now, these questions ain't about pointing fingers. Not at this stage. They're about building a structure. Because in a case with no clear physical evidence, the timeline, it becomes everything. Every answer gets written down. Every single detail gets compared. Because what investigators are looking for is consistency. Does the story stay the same? Do the times line up? And are there any gaps? And here's the truth of it, folks. In high-stress situations, small inconsistencies can happen naturally. People do forget things. They mix up minutes. They lose track of time. And that alone doesn't mean anything. But when something important doesn't line up, that's when it gets the attention. While all of this is happening inside and around that house, outside, the town's starting to feel it. It starts with one porch light, then another, then another. Neighbors stepping out into the cold, arms folded, looking toward the same spot. Nobody's loud yet. Nobody's asking too many questions out in the open. But man, you can feel it building. That quiet kind of concern that spreads without needing words. Because in a place like Enterprise, Alabama, folks know when something ain't right. And back at the scene, time keeps moving. And with every minute that passes, the weight gets heavier. Because the longer a child remains missing without answers, the more serious the situation becomes. That's just reality. And everybody there knows it, even if nobody says it out loud. By the time those first hours start slipping away, one thing is already clear. This isn't a misunderstanding. This isn't a child just wandering off. Something happened. Somewhere between the last known moment everything was normal and the moment that call was made, something changed. And whatever that something was, it didn't leave behind an easy trail to follow. By the time the first wave of confusion settled into something more serious, the focus shifted outward, away from the house, out into the land surrounding Enterprise, Alabama. Because when a child can't be found close, you got to start looking farther and faster. Now, if you ain't from down there, you might not understand just how tricky that terrain can be. I need you to understand that parts of Coffee County look open enough at a glance. Fields, dirt roads, stretches of yard between homes. But just beyond that, it thickens up real quick. Pine woods, underbrush, thickets, ditches that don't look deep till you're standing right over them. The kind of places that can hide things without ever trying too hard. And once you step off the road and into those pine trees, the world gets quieter in a very different way. Sound don't travel the same, and light don't either. And that matters when you're conducting a search. As more personnel arrived, search efforts started forming into something structured. Law enforcement, volunteers, folks from the community who didn't think twice about showing up. Because that's how small towns work. When something goes wrong, people come together. They grab flashlights, they put on their boots, and they start walking. Lines get formed, slow, careful sweeps through areas surrounding the home. Eyes down. Every step is deliberate. Looking for anything that don't belong. In situations like this, searchers ain't just looking for the child. They're looking for signs. Something disturbed, something out of place. It could be small, a piece of fabric, just a mark in the dirt maybe. Something moved where it shouldn't be. Because sometimes the smallest detail ends up meaning the most. And when you've got nothing else to go on, you start treating every little thing like it could matter. And here's the part folks don't like to think about. Time don't help in situations like this. Not at the start. Every hour that passes without answers makes things harder. Scents fade. Tracks disappear. Conditions change. And everybody out there, whether they say it out loud or not, knows exactly what that means. That urgency. It ain't just pressure. It's a clock. And it don't slow down for nobody. You can feel it during those searches, even if nobody says a damn word. Boots crunching through leaves, branches shifting, flashlights sweeping low across the ground. And underneath all of that, there's something else. Hope. But hope is also mixed with fear. Because every person out there wants to be the one who finds something. But at the same time, Lord God knows they're praying that they don't. Searches didn't just happen in daylight. They carried on well into the night. The cold air settling in. Breath visible under flashlight beams. The kind of cold that creeps through your clothes and stays there. But nobody was thinking about comfort. Not really. They kept moving, calling out, listening, stopping every now and then just to hear if anything answered back. But most of the time, it was just the wind. And then comes the hardest part, when sweep after sweep turns up nothing. No clear sign, no direction, just more questions. Because in most cases, searches give you something, even if it's small, even if it's not the answer you want. But when there's nothing, that's when things start feeling really, really off. Not just difficult, not just sad, off. Like a piece of the story ain't sitting where it's supposed to. While all this was happening outside, the focus never fully left the home, because no matter how far search efforts spread, everything is still traced back to that one place, that one stretch of time, that window where everything changed. Investigators continued working to understand those moments, carefully, methodically, not rushing conclusions, just trying to build a timeline that actually holds together. Because when the land gives you nothing and the search comes up empty, there's only one place left to look. Back at the beginning. Back at the moments nobody can fully explain. And back at the question that keeps getting heavier with time. What happened inside that house on Christmas night? By the time a few days had passed in Enterprise, that quiet from Christmas night, it was gone, replaced with something much, much heavier. Because when answers don't come quick in a case like this, well, people start filling in the blanks themselves. At first, it was all heart. Folks brought food, dropped off prayers, offered whatever help they could. You know, that's just how a place like Enterprise works. But as the days stretched on and there still weren't no clear answers, that tone started to change. It wasn't loud at first, just quiet conversations. Low voices at the diner, side glances at the grocery store. Folks leaning a little closer than usual when they talked, because people were asking the same damn question over and over again. How does a baby just disappear like that? Now here's the part folks outside small towns don't always understand. When something like this happens, it don't stay contained to one house. It spreads. Every parent in Enterprise, Alabama started double checking their own locks. Every creak in the house sounded like a little different at night. And every shadow out past the porch light felt a little longer than it should. Because when there ain't a clear explanation, your mind starts building its own. And most of the time, it builds the worst one it can think of. While all that's happening out in the community, behind the scenes, the pressure on investigators, you can only imagine, it keeps building. Because now it ain't just about finding answers. It's about finding them fast enough to keep control of the situation. Tips start flooding in. Some helpful, some not. Every single one has to be looked at though. Checked, documented, and followed up on. Even the ones that don't go anywhere. Because you don't get to ignore a lead in a case like this. Not when a child is involved. And this right here, this is where things get dangerous. Because rumors, they don't need evidence. They don't need timelines. They don't even need to make sense. They just need somebody willing to repeat them. And once they start moving, whoa, it's like a South Alabama freight train. They move fast, really fast. One person says they heard something. Next thing you know, it's being told just like it's the truth. That's how confusion builds. And that's how cases get muddy from the outside. Through all of that, law enforcement has to stay steady, careful with what they release, precise with what they confirm. Because every piece of information that goes public, it shapes how the rest of the community reacts. And in a situation like this, the last thing anyone needs is panic or misinformation taking over. So updates, they stay limited, measured, and sometimes slower than folks would like. But hey, there's a reason for that. Back in the neighborhoods, times start feeling different. Days drag, nights feel longer. And that one question, that same one everybody's been carrying since Christmas night, doesn't get any lighter. If anything, it only gets heavier. Because now it ain't just about what happened. It's about why nobody knows. By this point, Enterprise ain't just a town waiting on answers. It's a town holding its breath. Watching, wondering, listening for anything that might make sense of it all. And the longer that silence stretches, the louder everything else becomes. By the time a case like this reaches this point, it ain't about the search anymore. Not in the same way, at least. Sure, folks are still out there looking. Woods still get walked and the edges of properties, they still get checked. But behind the scenes, everything starts circling back to one thing. Time. Because in a case where there ain't clear physical evidence sitting out in the open, the timeline itself becomes the evidence. Investigators go back to the very start, not just the moment the child was reported missing, but everything leading up to it. Christmas Day. Who was around? What time people came and went? What was said and what was done? Even the smallest details, they start mattering. What time the baby was fed? What time the baby was laid down? What the house sounded like? Maybe even what the house smelled like. What the environment felt like. Because when you don't have a clear event, you gotta build one, piece by piece. Every case like this has it. That stretch of time where something happened. But nobody can fully account for it. And in this case, that window sits right there in the late evening hours, after the baby was last known to be okay, and before it was realized something was way wrong. The gap becomes the center of everything. Investigators don't treat it like a rough estimate. They treat it like a boundary, and they start asking, what exactly does fit inside that space? Now here's something most folks don't realize unless they've been around an investigation like this. It ain't just about what people say. It's about whether it stays the same. When investigators go back over statements, they're not just listening for information. They're listening for consistency. The same timeline, the same sequence, the same details. Because when memories are real and clear, they tend to hold steady. And when details start shifting, even a little bit, they don't automatically mean something is wrong. But it does mean those areas, they get a little bit closer look. Sometimes a much closer look. Another thing that happens in this stage is reconstruction. Not guesswork, reconstruction. Investigators start laying out movements step by step, from room to room, from inside to outside, and from moment to moment. They look at how long does it take to move through the house? How long someone would realistically be gone from a room? What could be seen or heard from certain positions? It is methodical, measured, and sometimes uncomfortable in how detailed it does get, because it forces every second to be accounted for. And at this point, the home ain't just a location anymore. It is part of the investigation. Every doorway, every window, and every entry point, it gets looked at again, not rushed and not assumed. Just because something didn't stand out the first night don't mean it won't stand out now. Investigators revisit scenes all the time with fresh eyes, different lighting, different focus, and different questions. Because sometimes what gets missed early shows up later. It's not just inside the home either. They look at what was happening around it. Neighbors, traffic patterns, unusual activity, anything that could have intersected with that timeline, even if it seems small, even if it seems unrelated, because sometimes the detail that breaks a case wide open didn't seem important at the time. By now, this ain't a loud phase of the investigation, it's a quiet phase, focused and heavy. Because when everything comes back to a narrow window of time, that means the truth is in there somewhere. It has to be. And the more that window gets examined, the smaller that window starts to feel. Because time don't just pass in a case like this, it tightens. It narrows. It forces every detail into the light, whether it belongs there or not. And somewhere inside that stretch of Christmas night, between everything was fine and something's wrong, is the moment that explains everything. The only problem is, right now, that moment still ain't clear. By the time this case reached this point, things in Enterprise, Alabama didn't feel the same anymore. You know, that quiet we talked about before? It wasn't just uneasiness now. It had turned into complete tension. The kind you can feel when you walk into a room and folks stop talking. The kind that sits heavy in the chest because everybody's thinking the same damn thing, but nobody wants to be the one to say it out loud. And up to this point, everything had been searching, looking, asking, trying to piece together a timeline that made sense. Cases like this don't stay in that phase forever, and at some point, investigators have to shift from what could have happened to what they can prove happened. And when that shift comes, it usually means one thing. They found enough to take the next step. Then came the update that shook the entire community of Enterprise, Alabama. The child's mother, identified in reports as Mrs. Reed, was placed under arrest. And just like that, everything changed again. Because up until that moment, people had been sitting in uncertainty. And after that, the questions did not go away. But they did get sharper. Now, this part matters, and it's important to understand it clearly. An arrest does not mean a final answer. It doesn't close the case. It doesn't automatically explain everything. What it does mean is this. Investigators believe they have probable cause, enough evidence to support criminal charges and move the case forward through the legal system. That's it. No more, no less. The courts are where the full story gets tested. Meanwhile, back in Coffee County, that news spread faster than anything that came before it. Phones lit up, conversations started before folks even had all the details. Some people felt a sense of movement, like finally something was happening. Others, they didn't feel any relief at all, just more confusion. Because even with an arrest, there were still questions sitting right there unanswered. Cases like this split a town in ways folks don't always expect. You know, you got part of the people saying law enforcement wouldn't make that move unless they had something solid. Others quietly asking, what are we still missing? Because even when a case moves forward, the human side of it don't just fall into place. It's not that easy. And at one point, records show the child's mother was moved from Coffee County to Houston County. Officials have not publicly laid out every detail behind that decision. Transfers like that can happen for a number of reasons. Logistics, housing, or even safety considerations depending on the situation. But what matters is this. The case isn't slowing down. If anything, it's gaining weight. Even with an arrest, some of the most important questions remain the same. What exactly happened in that window of time? Where did things go wrong? And most importantly, where in the hell is the truth in all of it? Because an arrest moves a case forward, but it doesn't fill in every blank, at least not right away. And in closing, in a small town like Enterprise, an arrest don't bring quiet. It brings a different kind of noise. The kind made up of questions, opinions, and people trying to make sense of something that still don't fully make sense at all. And as this case moved out of the search phase and into the courtroom phase, one thing became clearer than ever. The story ain't over. It ain't even close. Y'all have a very, very, very disturbing update for you on this story. You know, it's been quite some time now since that cold Christmas night in Enterprise. And for a while, it felt like the case had gone quiet on the outside. Not forgotten, just quiet. The kind of quiet that makes folks uneasy, like something is moving behind the scenes that ain't ready to be brought into the light just yet. And then the update came out, and oh boy, it hit really different. According to information that's come to light through the investigation, authorities began focusing on a new possibility. I want to stress possibility. One, it's very hard to hear, and it's even harder to process. Investigators now believe the child's remains may have been placed in a dumpster at some point after the disappearance. Now, that ain't been publicly confirmed in full detail, and law enforcement has been careful with what they release. But even the suggestion of that possibility, it changes how people look at everything. You see, when a case shifts in that direction, the entire scope of the investigation changes. It has to. Search efforts that once focused on homes, yards, and wooded areas start expanding into places people they don't even want to think about. Waste systems, collection routes, transfer sites, landfills. Because if something was placed in a dumpster, it doesn't stay in one place for very long. And that introduces a level of difficulty that's hard to overstate. See, dumpsters, they don't just sit. They get emptied, moved, transported. Contents get compacted, transferred, and sometimes taken miles away from where they started. So when investigators begin working under that kind of theory, they're not just looking in one location anymore. They're trying to trace movement, timing, routes, which trucks ran that night, where they went, and what facilities they stopped at. And every hour that passes makes that process harder. And back in Coffee County, that update didn't just land as information. It landed as weight. Because it takes the unknown and replaces it with something people do not want to accept. The kind of possibility that changes the tone of every conversation. Folks who had been holding on to hope, real, stubborn hope, started feeling the hope shift into something else, something heavier. So how did the community react to this news? Well, you could feel it in the way people talked. Lower voices, longer pauses, less guessing and more silence. Because when a case reaches this point, people start realizing something. This may not have been just a simple ending. This may not be the kind of story where everything gets tied up clean. And that's a hard truth for any town to sit with. As of now, investigators continue to follow leads and examine every piece of information connected to that theory. Nothing about this process will be quick, and nothing about it is easy. But hey, cases like this don't stop, even when updates are limited. Work continues, quietly, carefully, and with one goal in mind, finding the truth. Because at the center of all this, still that same question that's been hanging over Enterprise, Alabama since last Christmas. What really happened in that small window of time? And now, investigators may be closer to an answer, even if it's one nobody ever wanted to hear.